October 13, 1939. A moonless night. Somewhere beneath the black waters of the North Sea, a tin can with 44 men crammed inside is heading toward certain death. Their target is the heart of the British Royal Navy, a fortress that hasn't been breached in 25 years, a base the Admiralty calls impregnable. And they're going in with a weapon the British High Command literally laughed at. The Type VIB U-boat, a cramped steel tube that skeptics dismissed as little more than a toy compared to the mighty battleships anchored at their destination. Scapa Flow. The name alone struck fear into German hearts. This vast natural harbor in Scotland's Orkney Islands spanned 125 square miles of protected water. During World War I, this was where the entire German high seas fleet came to die, scuttled in humiliation after Germany's defeat in 1919. The ghosts of 52 proud warships still rested on the seabed, a watery grave that reminded every German sailor of their nation's greatest naval shame. Now, barely 6 weeks into World War II, one man believed he could penetrate this legendary fortress and exact revenge. His name was Gunther Prien, a 30-year-old submarine commander with ice-blue eyes and nerves of steel. But Prien's path to this moment hadn't been paved with privilege or military pedigree. Born in 1908 to a judge's family, Prien's childhood shattered when his parents divorced. His mother struggled to feed 3 children in Leipzig by selling lace, barely making ends meet. Young Gunther worked as a delivery boy, running errands for prickly old women who treated him with contempt. But above his bed hung a portrait of his hero, the Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama, and Gunther dreamed of the sea. At 15, with just 91 Swedish kronor earned as a tour guide and against his mother's wishes, Prien enrolled in the German Seamen's College. For 3 brutal months, he endured harsh discipline and grueling training. He earned his merchant marine captain's license by 1932, only to find himself unemployed when the Great Depression devastated Germany's shipping industry. Angry at a government that seemed powerless to help its citizens, Prien joined the Nazi Party in May 1932 and volunteered for the Reichsmarine in January 1933. The submarine service was different from anything Prien had experienced. After a year on the light cruiser Königsberg, he transferred to U-boats in October 1935. These vessels were claustrophobic nightmares, diesel-electric coffins that dove beneath the waves with crews packed so tightly you could barely turn around. The air reeked of unwashed bodies, diesel fumes, and fear. One mechanical failure, one depth charge too close, and you'd never see sunlight again. But Prien thrived in this environment. He served as first watch officer on U-26 during the Spanish Civil War, learning his craft under fire. In 1938, he received his own command, U-47, a brand new type VIB submarine. The boat was 220 feet long, just 20 feet wide, and carried a crew of 44 men. To the British Admiralty, these U-boats seemed primitive compared to their massive battleships. They called them toys, tin cans, barely worth worrying about. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Admiral Karl Donitz, commander of Germany's submarine fleet, stared at the reconnaissance photographs spread across his desk. The images showed something that made his pulse quicken. The entire British home fleet anchored peacefully at Scapa Flow, protected by what the Royal Navy believed were impenetrable defenses. Scapa Flow had been the Grand Fleet's sanctuary during World War I. 8 natural channels provided access to the harbor, but the British had closed 5 with block ships, old merchant vessels deliberately sunk to create barriers. The 3 main entrances, Hoxa Sound, Hoy Sound, and Switha Sound, bristled with defenses, anti-submarine booms, steel nets, coastal artillery batteries, patrol boats, and underwater detection cables called induction loops. But Donitz noticed something in those aerial photographs. Kirk Sound, one of the supposedly blocked eastern channels, had a gap. The block ships Thames, Soriano, and Minich had been sunk there in World War I, but 21 years of tides and currents had shifted them. There appeared to be a narrow channel between the wrecks, perhaps just 18 yards wide at high tide. It would be a nightmare to navigate. Shallow water, unknown shoals, 10-knot rip tides, and the northern lights might illuminate any intruder. But it was theoretically possible. 2 German submarines had tried to infiltrate Scapa Flow during the First World War. On November 23, 1914, U-18 was rammed twice before running aground, her crew captured. On October 28, 1918, UB-116 was detected by hydrophone and destroyed with all hands. Both failures had become cautionary tales in German naval circles. Scapa Flow was supposed to be a death trap. Dönitz called it Special Operation P. He needed someone with skill, nerve, and an almost reckless courage. He needed Gunther Prien. When Prien arrived at Dönitz's office, the admiral got straight to the point. He spread the reconnaissance photos, charts, and intelligence reports across the table and asked a simple question. Do you think a determined commander could get his boat inside Scapa Flow and attack the enemy's forces lying there? Prien asked for 48 hours to study the materials. That evening, he sent his wife and young daughter out for the night and spread the documents on his writing table. For hours, he pored over aerial photographs showing the home fleet at anchor, studied tide tables, examined the blockship positions, and calculated approach vectors. The intelligence was extraordinary, gathered by German submarine U-16's reconnaissance mission and Luftwaffe pilot Siegfried Nemir's daring photo flights over the harbor. The gap in Kirk Sound was real, but navigating it would require threading the needle at the exact moment of high tide. The currents could slam U-47 against the blockships or ground her on unseen shoals. The northern lights, common in October, might illuminate the submarine on the surface. British patrol boats could spot them at any moment. And once inside, they'd have to sink a major warship and escape the same way they came in, with the entire Royal Navy hunting them. Most officers would have called it suicide. Prien called it possible. 48 hours later, he returned to Dönitz's office and said he would do it. The admiral smiled. Prien was his favorite U-boat commander, possessing what Dönitz described as all the personal qualities and professional abilities required for such a mission. On October 1, 1939, Dönitz gathered his most experienced U-boat commanders and briefed them on Operation P. He asked for a volunteer. Prien's hand shot up before anyone else could move. The mission was scheduled for October 13 to 14, 1939, when tides would be highest and the moon would be dark. U-47 would depart Kiel, cross the North Sea, penetrate Kirk Sound at high tide just before midnight, sink as many British ships as possible, and escape before dawn. Simple on paper, nearly impossible in execution. Prien told his crew nothing during the voyage across the North Sea. For 5 days they sailed through treacherous waters, wondering why their captain seemed so tense, why he constantly studied charts of the Orkney Islands. Not until October 13th, when they were hours from their target, did Prien finally gather his 44-man crew in the cramped forward torpedo room and reveal their mission. The reaction was mixed. Some men grinned with excitement. Others went pale. Everyone understood that they were either about to make history or become another cautionary tale of German naval ambition. Chief Engineer Johann Friedrich Wessels, who had meticulously maintained U-47's diesel engines for this moment, simply nodded and said his machines were ready. First Watch Officer Engelbert Endres checked the torpedo loads one more time. They carried 7 torpedoes total, and every single one had to count. As sunset approached on October 13th, U-47 dove to periscope depth and crept toward the Orkney Islands. Through the periscope, Prien could see the low, dark shapes of the islands against the evening sky. Somewhere beyond those islands lay Scapa Flow. Somewhere in that harbor sat the pride of the British Royal Navy. And somewhere in Kirk Sound lay the narrow gap that would either make Preen a legend or send him to a watery grave alongside the scuttled German high seas fleet from World War I. The ultimate revenge was about to begin. At 19:15 hours on October 13, 1939, U-47 surfaced in the gathering darkness. Preen climbed into the conning tower alongside 2 watch officers and his bosun. The night was not cooperating. Instead of the expected darkness, the aurora borealis danced across the northern sky, casting an eerie orange and blue glow over the water. The northern lights made U-47 far more visible than Preen had hoped. For a moment he considered aborting, but his crew's morale was high, and postponing would achieve nothing. The tide was right. The time was now. Preen ordered the submarine to proceed. At 23:07 hours, disaster nearly struck before they even reached Kirk Sound. A merchant vessel appeared off Roseness, and Preen ordered an emergency crash dive. For 30 agonizing minutes, U-47 sat on the seabed while the ship passed overhead. At 23:31 hours, they resurfaced and continued their approach. The entrance to Kirk Sound lay ahead, illuminated by the flickering northern lights. The low coastal hills were outlined against the pale sky, making navigation both easier and more dangerous. Easier because Preen could see where he was going, more dangerous because any British lookout could see his submarine. Then came the first critical error. Preen mistook his position and began heading towards Scary Sound, one of the blocked passages with no navigable channel. His navigator, noticing the sudden decrease in depth under the keel, screamed a correction. Preen cursed and ordered a hard turn to starboard, nearly at right angles. The submarine swung desperately northeast, narrowly avoiding running aground in the wrong channel. Now properly aligned with Kirk Sound, U-47 crept forward into the passage between the blockships. Preen could see them now. 3 dark shapes breaking the surface, the sunken wrecks of Thames, Soriano, and Minich positioned to block any submarine from entering Scapa Flow. The depth gauge began to drop alarmingly. 2 meters of water under the keel. 1 meter. Half a meter. And then came the sickening sound of metal scraping against something solid. U-47 had brushed against the anchor cable of the blockship Soriano and was grounding on the shallow bottom. Inside the submarine, every man held his breath. If they stuck here, if the tide dropped, if a British patrol spotted them, it was over. Preen ordered both engines to full power ahead. The diesel motors roared, dangerously loud in the quiet night, as Chief Engineer Wessels pushed the machinery to its limits. The submarine shuddered, scraped, groaned. Then, after what felt like an eternity, Erwin Halser in the control room reported clear water under the keel. They were through Kirk Sound. They were inside Scapa Flow. At 0:27 hours on October 14th, Preen made the famous entry in his logbook, "We're sinned in Scapa Flow. We are in Scapa Flow." The crew could hardly believe it. They had penetrated the Royal Navy's most secure anchorage, the heart of British naval power. Now they just had to find something to sink. Preen scanned the harbor through his periscope, searching for targets. The intelligence had promised a harbor full of British warships, but the northern basin appeared almost empty. Most of the home fleet was at sea, hunting for German raiders in the Atlantic. But then, off to the north near the shore, Preen spotted dark shapes, warships at anchor. He couldn't identify them clearly in the dim light, but they were large. One appeared to be a battleship or heavy cruiser. That would do. Preen maneuvered U-47 into attack position. His torpedo crew stood ready at their stations, hands gripping the firing mechanisms, waiting for the order. At 0:58 hours, Preen gave the command. Torpedoes 1, 2, and 3 launched from the forward tubes. The submarine shuddered as compressed air blasted the weapons into the water. 40 seconds later, They should have heard explosions. One explosion. Only one. 2 of the 3 torpedoes had malfunctioned, a persistent problem with German torpedoes throughout the war. Preen couldn't know it yet, but that single torpedo had struck the bow of HMS Royal Oak, a British battleship. The explosion tore a hole in the ship's hull, but the damage seemed limited. On board the Royal Oak, many crew members thought the explosion was an internal accident, perhaps in the paint locker. Surely no German submarine could be inside Scapa Flow. Preen ordered U-47 to turn and line up for another attack. As the submarine swung around, he noticed something alarming. Lights were coming on aboard the British ships. Had they realized they were under attack? Were patrol boats being launched? How much time did he have? He loaded his stern torpedo tube, his only remaining ready weapon, and at 1:16 hours, fired it at the same target. This torpedo also hit HMS Royal Oak, but again the damage seemed limited. Preen cursed the malfunctioning weapons and ordered his crew to reload the forward tubes as quickly as possible. In the cramped torpedo room, sweating men wrestled the massive weapons into position, a process that normally took 20 minutes. They worked with desperate speed. Every second counted. At 1:22 hours, just 6 minutes after the stern shot, the forward tubes were reloaded with their 3 remaining torpedoes. Preen aimed carefully at the now clearly illuminated battleship and fired all 3. This time the weapons worked perfectly. All 3 torpedoes slammed into HMS Royal Oak's starboard side in rapid succession. The explosions were catastrophic. Royal Oak, a veteran battleship from World War I, didn't stand a chance. The massive detonations tore through her hull, igniting ammunition magazines and flooding compartments. The ship rolled violently to starboard, and within 13 minutes, she capsized and sank in the cold waters of Scapa Flow. Of the 1,234 men aboard Royal Oak that night, 835 died. Many were trapped below decks as the ship rolled over. Others jumped into the freezing, oil-covered water and succumbed to hypothermia. It was one of the worst disasters in Royal Navy history, and it happened in the supposedly impregnable sanctuary of Scapa Flow. Preen watched through his periscope as the British battleship disappeared beneath the waves. Around the harbor, chaos erupted. Lights blazed on every remaining ship. Sirens wailed. Patrol boats began racing through the darkness. Searchlights swept the water, searching for the attacker. It was time to leave. Preen ordered U-47 to turn toward Kirk Sound and maximum speed. They had to reach the gap in the blockships before the British sealed it or before patrol boats caught them in the shallows. The escape was even more terrifying than the infiltration. With every ship in Scapa Flow now alert, with searchlights probing the darkness, with patrol boats closing in, U-47 raced for the narrow channel. The submarine ran on the surface at maximum speed, her diesel engine screaming, spray flying over the bow. They threaded back through Kirk Sound, scraping past the blockships one more time, and burst out into the open North Sea. Behind them, Scapa Flow erupted in futile fury. The Royal Navy's impregnable fortress had been violated, a battleship sunk, and the attacker had vanished like a ghost. On the morning of October 15th, as U-47 made for home waters, British authorities in Scapa Flow made a decision that came too late. An old steamer arrived to be sunk as an additional blockship in Kirk Sound, closing the gap. The decision had been made back in July 1939, 3 months before Preen's raid. But bureaucracy and delays had prevented it from being implemented in time. That gap in the blockships had cost the Royal Navy a battleship and 835 lives. On October 17, 1939, U-47 entered Wilhelmshaven harbor to a scene Gunther Preen would never forget. Word of the Scapa Flow raid had already reached Germany, and the entire Kriegsmarine seemed to have turned out to welcome them home. Admiral Karl Donitz and Grand Admiral Erich Raeder, chief of the entire German Navy, stood on the dock waiting. Before Prien could even disembark, Raeder awarded the entire crew the Iron Cross Second Class on the spot. But this was only the beginning of their celebrity. The next day, Prien and his crew were flown to Berlin aboard Adolf Hitler's personal aircraft. On October 18th, at the Reich Chancellery, Hitler himself awarded Prien the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross, making him the first U-boat commander to receive Germany's highest military decoration. American journalist William L. Shirer attended the press conference that afternoon and recorded his impressions of Prien. Clean-cut, cocky, obviously capable, and a fanatical Nazi. When asked how he did it, Prien revealed little, saying only that he had no trouble getting past the harbor defenses. The implication was clear, though Prien didn't need to state it explicitly. British negligence had been extraordinary. Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister, seized upon the Scapa Flow raid as a gift from heaven. Here was a daring act of revenge against Britain, perpetrated in the very harbor where Germany's World War I fleet had been humiliated. Goebbels gave Prien the nickname Der Stier von Scapa Flow, the Bull of Scapa Flow. The emblem of a snorting bull was painted on U-47's conning tower and soon became the symbol of the entire 7th U-boat flotilla. Prien cooperated with the propaganda machine, though by some accounts he didn't particularly enjoy being a propaganda tool. He published a book, Mein Weg nach Scapa Flow, My Way to Scapa Flow, recounting his life and the famous raid. He gave speeches, attended ceremonies, and became the face of the U-boat service. For a boy who had once run errands for contemptuous old women in Leipzig, it was a dizzying transformation. But while Germany celebrated, Britain reeled from the shock. The sinking of HMS Royal Oak was the first of 5 Royal Navy battleships and battlecruisers that would be lost during World War II. But it had the most devastating impact on morale. Scapa Flow was supposed to be safe. If a U-boat could penetrate those defenses, what did that say about the Royal Navy's ability to protect itself? An Admiralty Board of Inquiry, led by Admiral Reginald Plunkett Earl-Drax, investigated the disaster. Their official report condemned the defenses at Scapa Flow as woefully inadequate and censured Admiral Wilfred French, the admiral commanding Orkneys and Shetlands, for their unprepared state. The irony was bitter. French had warned as early as 1938 about Scapa Flow's deficient anti-submarine defenses, and had even volunteered to bring a small ship or submarine himself past the block ships to prove his point. His warnings had been ignored. Now he was placed on the retired list, a scapegoat for institutional failure. Winston Churchill, who had just returned to his World War I position as First Lord of the Admiralty when war broke out, took immediate action. He ordered the eastern approaches to Scapa Flow sealed with concrete causeways linking Lamb Home, Glimpse Home, Bury, and South Ronaldsay to the Scottish mainland. Construction began in May 1940, largely carried out by Italian prisoners of war. These massive barriers, which became known as the Churchill Barriers, weren't essentially complete until September 1944, and were officially opened just after VE Day in May 1945. The home fleet didn't return to Scapa Flow until March 1940, spending the intervening months at Loch Ewe on Scotland's west coast. Even that move proved dangerous. On the way to Loch Ewe, the battleship HMS Nelson was damaged by a mine laid by U-31. Prien's raid had forced the Royal Navy to abandon its primary base for 6 crucial months. For Gunther Prien, fame brought both opportunities and pressures. Over the next 18 months, he conducted 9 more war patrols and proved himself one of Germany's top U-boat commanders. His total score eventually reached 30 merchant ships sunk, 162,769 tons, plus the 29,150-ton Royal Oak, and 8 damaged vessels, 62,751 tons. He spent 238 days at sea, hunting Allied shipping across the North Atlantic. In 1940, Prien received the Oak Leaves to his Knight's Cross, one of the highest military decorations Germany could bestow. He was promoted to Korvettenkapitän, lieutenant commander. Admiral Donitz suggested that Prien transfer to a training command, taking his experience and using it to teach the next generation of U-boat commanders. But Prien refused. He wanted to stay with U-47 and his crew. The sea was where he belonged. 2 members of Prien's Scapa Flow crew would also earn the Knight's Cross during the war. Chief Engineer Johann Friedrich Wessels, whose diesel motors had powered U-47 through Kirk Sound, survived the war and lived until 1988. First Watch Officer Engelbert Endres left U-47 in September 1941 to take command of U-567, only to be killed in action on December 21, 1941, when his submarine was sunk by depth charges from British warships northeast of the Azores. He was 30 years old. On February 20, 1941, U-47 departed Lorient, France, for her 10th war patrol. Prien was in good spirits. Just 4 days into the patrol, on February 24th, U-47 attacked convoy OB-290 and sank 4 ships totaling 16,310 tons. It seemed like another successful mission. The last radio message from U-47 was received on the morning of March 7, 1941, reporting a position south of Iceland in the North Atlantic. Then silence. U-47 and her entire crew of 45 men vanished without a trace. Gunther Prien was 33 years old. For months after U-47's disappearance, the German government kept Prien's death secret. Hitler feared that announcing the loss of Germany's most famous U-boat commander would damage public morale. But Winston Churchill personally announced Prien's death to the British House of Commons, and Allied propaganda broadcasts to Germany repeatedly taunted listeners with the question, "Where is Prien?" Finally, on May 23, 1941, Germany was forced to acknowledge that the bull of Scapa Flow was dead. The announcement sent shockwaves through the German population. Prien had been a symbol of German naval prowess, proof that Germany could strike back against the mighty Royal Navy. His loss was deeply felt. For decades, historians believed that U-47 had been sunk by the British destroyer HMS Wolverine on March 8, 1941. But modern research has cast doubt on this claim. Some evidence suggests that Wolverine actually attacked and damaged a different submarine, Eckermann's UA, a foreign U-boat captured and commissioned by Germany. So how did U-47 die? The most likely explanation is the cruelest. U-47 may have been sunk by one of her own circling torpedoes. German torpedoes in the early war years were notoriously unreliable, plagued by faulty depth-keeping mechanisms and premature detonations. If a torpedo malfunctioned and circled back, it could strike the submarine that fired it. 2 American submarines in the Pacific were also believed to have been lost to the same type of accident. For a crew that had survived the Scapa Flow raid, the most daring submarine operation in history, to die from their own malfunctioning weapon would be a bitter irony. The Scapa Flow raid's immediate military impact was limited. HMS Royal Oak was an aging battleship, commissioned in 1916, and her loss didn't significantly affect the numerical superiority the Royal Navy enjoyed over the Kriegsmarine. But the psychological impact was enormous. Prien's raid proved that German U-boats could bring the war to British home waters, that no anchorage was truly safe, and that the small submarines the British had dismissed as toys could threaten even the mightiest battleships. The raid also validated Admiral Donitz's belief in the U-boat as Germany's most effective naval weapon. U-boat production didn't increase immediately after Scapa Flow, but Donitz had succeeded in securing Hitler's attention. Over the next 4 years, U-boats would sink thousands of Allied merchant ships and warships, bringing Britain to the brink of starvation in the Battle of the Atlantic. The Churchill barriers that sealed Scapa Flow's eastern approaches remain today, converted into causeways that connect several of the Orkney Islands to the Scottish mainland. Travelers can drive across them on the A961 highway, passing the rusting hulks of blockships that still jut above the water. The barriers stand as permanent monuments to the night Gunther Preen proved that the impregnable could be penetrated. HMS Royal Oak lies where she sank, in the shallow waters of Scapa Flow. The site is designated an official war grave, and diving is prohibited without permission from the Ministry of Defense. A large green buoy marks the location. On the anniversary of the sinking each year, Royal Navy divers descend to the wreck to place a white ensign, honoring the 835 men who died there. In Germany, Preen's legacy became complicated after the war. In 1967, the West German Navy considered naming a guided missile destroyer after him, but discovered that legends of Preen distancing himself from Nazism and joining the German resistance were false. The ship was instead named Lütjens after Admiral Gunther Lütjens. A street in Schönberg, Plauen, still bears Preen's name, one of the few remaining public commemorations of the Bowl of Scapa Flow. The truth about Gunther Preen is more complex than either Nazi propaganda or post-war legends allowed. He was a skilled submarine commander who rose from poverty through determination and talent. He was also a member of the Nazi Party who cooperated with Joseph Goebbels' propaganda machine. He performed one of the most daring military operations in naval history, an achievement that even Winston Churchill called a remarkable feat of professional skill and daring. He also served a regime that perpetrated immense evil. What cannot be disputed is the audacity of the Scapa Flow raid itself. On that October night in 1939, Preen and 44 men squeezed into a steel tube that the British Admiralty had mocked as a toy submarine. They navigated through currents that could have torn them apart, threaded between blockships by mere yards, penetrated defenses that had stood unchallenged for a generation, sank a battleship in the heart of enemy waters, and escaped to tell the tale. For one night, at least, the impossible became possible. The toy submarine proved it had real teeth, and the fortress that couldn't be breached learned that no defensive system, no matter how strong, is invulnerable to human daring and determination. The waters of Scapa Flow remember that night. The rusting blockships remember. The green buoy marking Royal Oak's grave remembers. And the Churchill barriers, standing guard over waters that once ran red with British blood, remember the lesson learned at such terrible cost. Never underestimate what a determined enemy in a small boat can accomplish. Never dismiss the weapon your adversary wields as inadequate. And never, ever assume that your fortress is truly impregnable. Somewhere beneath the North Atlantic, Gunther Preen and the crew of U-47 rest in their steel tomb. They were neither pure heroes nor pure villains, but men who performed an extraordinary feat of arms in service to a cause that history has rightfully condemned. Their story remains a testament to courage, skill, and the cruel realities of war, where bravery and tragedy are often indistinguishable, and where the line between genius and madness is measured in inches of clearance beneath a submarine's keel. The Bull of Scapa Flow charged once into British waters and made history. He never made it home from his final charge. But the legend of that October night, when 8 officers and 36 crew members accomplished what an entire fleet could not, will endure as long as people tell stories of the sea, of daring, and of the thin steel shells that brave men took to war.